after Kawhi's departure as well as Danny Green, I'm seeing a couple of reports asking if it's time for the Toronto Raptors to rebuild. Wow, okay, I know they're probably not going to win another championship, but this team on paper is still very rock solid. Short answer, guys, are the Toronto Raptors going to make the 2020 NBA playoffs? Yes. Last season, they were 17-5 without Kawhi Leonard. Of course, they had a better record against non-playoff teams than playoff teams during that streak. But overall, this team has enough talent on paper to make the playoffs even without Kawhi and Danny Green. They'll likely be a lower seed, especially with some of the top-end talent in the East. But let's take a look at who's still on the Toronto Raptors roster, who we want to see improving, and also talk about the contracts that are set to expire this year. So the contracts that are expiring are Kyle Lowry, Marc Gasol, and Serge Ibaka. Those are the big name players. Where are they going to be headed to next season? Are the Raptors potentially going to trade these players in order to trade for assets for a potential rebuild? The answer, I have to say, I am not 100% sure, but traditionally the Raptors don't really tank. They always try to make the playoffs. They always do their best, and I think a reason behind that is because, they represent Canada. They don't really want to be seen as a tanking team. So I don't think they'll trade away Marc Gasol, Ibaka, or Lowry. I believe VanVleet is also set for his contract to expire. So I don't believe they'll trade these players away unless those players ask for a trade. Considering they just came off a championship, I do see this roster staying together very closely. Kyle Lowry, I actually think, has a very, very talented skill set. The reason why I believe he's always up and down is because of his confidence. When he's confident, he can really ball out. If you guys saw him carrying the Raptors for the first quarter against the Warriors in the playoffs, you can understand that statement. VanVleet is an absolute dog. He fights hard. He plays with passion. He's the kind of guy that you want on your team and around your players. Another reason why I think the Raptors are going to be having a successful season is because they have great team chemistry. Apparently, according to Danny Green on his podcast, there was some drama that went down in the locker room during the last season, but no one really heard anything about it. There was no leaks. Everything stays really tight-knit in their group. So I think this team has great team chemistry, and that will probably help them out during a long season. And, of course, that should result in a playoff seed, even if it's low or whatever. On ESPN and on a bunch of other websites, they have Norman Powell listed as a small forward. I do see him taking a couple of minutes there, maybe even starting there at some point during the season. But he's also listed as 6'4". I think he may be too small to play that small forward position. I'd like to see a combination of Lowry, Norman Powell, and VanVleet carrying the guard spot. And then a player that I've been watching since he entered the league is OG. I like this player. He is very, very, very young. He's 21 years old, I believe. I think he's 21, 22. It's going to be his third season in the league. Last year, he had a little bit of a down season this year, but overall, he's still very efficient. He's defense-oriented, which matches really well with the Toronto Raptors. I'd like to see his three-point percentage go back to where it was during his first year in the NBA, around 37%. Higher would be, better, of course, but he's a very efficient player. He can play very solid defense. He needs to work on those free throws, but of course he's very young, and he's a player that I was excited for to see his development before Kawhi actually showed up. So hopefully OG has a good season next year, and then ideally he could slide right in to the small forward position. Look at that. That would be a nice roster, having Norman Powell cover for VanVleet and Lowry. Oh, that would be extremely nice. That would be spicy. Speaking of spicy things, we have Spicy P, Paschal Siakam, the most improved player of last season, looking to even improve more on his accomplishments if that's possible. He really can show that he can play. He's even shown an outside shot as well. Maybe we'll see him at some points even playing small forward, maybe. But I think he likes this power forward position. So hoping for big things from him next year. I know he plays with passion. And that's really what you want in a player. You want somebody that really cares about the game, cares about his teammates, and will do anything in his power to win. Next up, we have Marc Gasol. Let's say he keeps his starting position. Gasol, Ibaka, and Lowry all set to come off the books next season. So I would expect, you guys know, right, when players' contracts expire, they sometimes have really big seasons. You got to make that money. It's that contract year. So it might happen to Lowry, might happen to Gasol, might happen to Ibaka, might happen to all of them. Who knows? I'd like to see Gasol have a nice, very efficient season. We kind of know what the player he is already, what we're going to get out of him. And, of course, there is Ibaka. So, you know, he can come off the bench. Maybe he'll start at some point. Maybe they'll have a lineup with him in there as well. They'll probably juggle around different lineups, of course. They could go big with Siakam at the 3. They could have Ibaka at the 5. If they have any injuries, any players can slide in relatively easily. So overall, I still believe this roster is pretty decently deep. And also, they have a couple other players coming off the bench. And they even signed Stanley Johnson, I guess. They signed Stanley Johnson. I don't have too high hopes for him. But any player that can take a couple minutes off the bench, maybe he'll have a resurgence next year like Justice Winslow had. Who knows? Could happen. Not likely, but it could happen. So we'll see what happens with the Toronto Raptors. But considering how well they did without Kawhi last year, I do expect them to make the playoffs once again in this year. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are there any players that you're excited to see develop next season? Let me know your predictions for the Raptors record. And that'll be it. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more content in the future.